Welcome. We are excited today to talk about Insecure, the come up game, and its induction in the Black Games Archive. I actually think it's already in the archive, but now it is a featured game in the archive. And we kind of want to start, we're here with Latoya Peterson, first of all, and we're going to get your perspective on the game, the process of making the game, but also just the necessity for being able to archive Black participation in the industry over time, right? Black and BIPOC participation in the industry. And so we want to start out with just our taxonomy for the archive, which is just a rubric for how we decided what to track down and what to try to include in this very expansive endeavor of what is a Black game. That's kind of the general territory that we began the project with, but it actually is deeper than that. And that's no longer really the question. It's kind of like, where do Black culture, Blackness, Black participation, and Black development intersect with the video game industry over time and the game industry over time? So it's broader than what is a Black game. But Samantha and I, in trying to grapple with this question, came up with this rubric or this taxonomy for different things. And I think it'll be great to talk about Insecure, the come up game, in the context of some of these factors, right? So one of the things we do on the website is you can search by, voice acting, mechanics, narrative themes, and then pull up games that hit those different areas. And we also include anti-Blackness and regressive characterization, not as a criteria of inclusion, but something to flag that you might have a game that has Black characters, that might reference Black culture, but might also be anti-Black, right? So that's that's the category that we say is kind of the negative or problematic aspect of the taxonomy, but we wanted to find ways to be able to chart that as well. So we want to talk about Insecure and some of these aspects of the taxonomy. For example, we have development. Are people on the team? Are they representative? Do you have Black folk who worked on the production of this game? And in the game industry, it's very hard to track that. It's very hard in general to find out who were on these big teams in some cases of people, but we're asking folks to self-disclose and let us know, what did you work on? Did you help contribute to making a game? We want to know that. But then there's also voice acting and motion capture, right? Like, who are the people that are acting and contributing to their persona, their bodies, to the production of that game. We have mechanics. What is a Black mechanic? We're trying to find out, and we actually are finding out that mechanics can register in a Black cultural context for sure. Narrative themes is another category. Politics, ideology, history. What is the political orientation of that work? Are there playable Black characters, right? Are there Black NPCs? So not all games have all of these, but we're finding that some games have quite a bit of these features. Intersectionality, does a game kind of look at different aspects of identity and put them into conversation in complex ways? Black cultural traditions, how are those represented? Hip hop, different aspects of Black history. Let's see, character creation systems. Do you have a robust character creation system that allows people to try to represent themselves in that space? And then the fandom category has to do with, how have fans embraced Black people and Black folk embraced this game? Have they kind of essentially made it Black or significant to Black culture through their reception practices? Similar to that is modding. People will mod games and add in content to kind of make it more realistic or more true to their experiences. And then I've already described the anti-Blackness and why we have that there. So that is a long-winded introduction to thinking about this game and some of the aspects of it that are exciting to us and why we want to include it.
Absolutely. So you want me just to jump in and kind of explain the whole genesis of the thing? And I think that'll explain some of the questions you have about mechanics and stuff like that. So, okay.
That would
Sure,
be
sure,
amazing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love to hear that story. And I've heard you talk about the game a lot, but this is for archival purposes. So in our future selves and future people will want to know this important backstory to the game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of backstory and there's a lot of stuff to understand. So it's going to be a little, it's going to be a little long, but we'll take it from the top. So,
Hmm.
in general, so when I came into the games industry, I had been a critic and a cultural writer and stuff like that. I had a lot of friends in the industry, but I wasn't formally in until my good friend Mithu Kandaker had, I think we had been talking, we were essentially like brunch homies, right? So we were in New York having brunch talking about how stuff should be different. Oh, we could do it this way. Da, 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 da. And at the time I was at ESPN and Disney and I was doing a lot of like advanced tech projects. I was working on VR and AR projects and I'd started working on some AI projects. And so we would talk at that time. Mitzi was still in her second startup, I think it was second startup, Spirit AI, where she was chief creative officer. And but we would basically have brunch in New York where we catch up and hang out with our mutual friends and kiki about the industry and different things that we wanted to see that were different. And we would talk about the games we would make. Like, what if we had a studio? What if we would do it this way? And what's funny about that, a little bird friend of ours, who I have a suspicion who it was working with HBO on another game. And they were like, oh, hey, we don't know what's going on, but Latoya and Mitu are cooking something up, and they might be really good candidates for this game that you want to make. So we got this call out of the blue from Will Price at HBO, now at Warner Brothers, from Will Price being like, hey, do you guys want to pitch a game for Insecure? And so for archival purposes, let's just explain that Insecure was a really genre-bending, groundbreaking show created by Issa Rae, who was known for her work on web series like Awkward Black Girl. She did a whole bunch of stuff. My favorite, one of my favorites is Ratchet Piece Theater. But she had so many different web series and different things that when she stepped up into Hollywood, and she had one show that was supposed to be here before. I think it was like I Hate LA Dudes that didn't come out, and then reworked into Insecure. So there's actually a really great article that really mirrors the development process for Black creative projects, where they talk about how Insecure almost didn't make it, right? And so anyway, but Insecure did make it and became this, again, this legendary show for this generation about what does it mean to be Black, to be young, to be generally female. It revolves around Issa and her three friends, with significant male participation from Lawrence and his three friends. But showcasing like this slice of that kind of, what was it? What was that old show, 30 something?
Hmm. Hmm.
So like it was an inheritance to shows like Girlfriends and Living Single, but also a response to like this lack of Blackness that is shown in other types of pop culture. And it was a really fresh and interesting take on adulting from and growing up and making the decisions that you make that are, on that cusp of life when you're in your late 20s, coming into your 30s. And so it's a legendary game. And one of the reasons that HBO reached out is because it was at the time the second most socially engaged with show outside of Game of Thrones. And if you understand what a big cultural moment Game of Thrones was a juggernaut, and it was like
Hmm.
syndicated simultaneously in like 24 different countries, multiple languages or whatever. So the fact that this smaller show that I think ended up syndicated in like 4 other countries, in this about this very slice of life, was able to totally dominate social media on Sundays, was a huge deal. So Will Price and then his partner at the time, or his VP executive at the time, Jeff Peters, both saw that something was happening culturally, and they wanted to do something special around Insecure, and they thought, why not find a game? But as we all know, most game studios do not have a profile that would fit this. And that came up time and time again when we went up for funding and stuff like that. A lot of the games industry is just very white and very male. Black developers are generally anywhere between 2 and 4% of the industry any given year. And so there's just not that many of us. So we got this call and we went, oh, okay, well, we don't even have a company yet, but we got to shoot this shot. Like, let's figure this out, right? So we're like, probably not going to get it, but let's do a pitch and see what happens. So we made a pitch. They really liked it. Then we ended up going to Los Angeles to pitch directly to Issa Rae. She brought Prentice with her, which is her showrunner. It was high pressure, but they ended up getting on board. And so we got a licensing deal with HBO, and we started work on Insecure the Come Up Game. And it's really funny because there's just, in general, there's a lot of obstacles that Black creators have to overcome when they're trying to do games. Funding is one of them. There's many. In our case, there's this great photo that we have. It's me, Anango, who is our chief rap officer, who did like the lyrics when we talked about cultural mechanics. We'll get to that. It was me, Mitu, and Anango in Issa's coffee shop. So she put a stake in the Hilltop, which is like her coffee shop, in Inglewood. And so there's a sign that says, "What a time to be alive." And we had posed under that sign because we had like just met with Issa. We were all happy, whatever. And this was February 2020.
Mm.
Next month, a pandemic broke out, shut down the world, changed everything, all the funding landscape, everything blew up. But at that time, we were like riding high. We had just done this amazing. We had won a pitch competition about our game and about the market for women and players of color. Like we were riding high at that moment. And then, reality. We lived through so much to make this game. But that is kind of like the genesis story of what happened. And one of the things that was really important to us is one, we were helping a Black creator extend her brand into video games, which you'll notice doesn't actually happen very often. I bring up the Black Panther game a lot just because it's a very easy touchstone. Black Panther made, I think, $2 trillion at the box office. Like this was an unmitigated success. And there still isn't a full dedicated game. They're working on one now, but it's been, let's see, the first movie came out, what, 2018? I was still in
Yeah,
2017.
2018. Is it 2017? It was either 2017 or 2018. And
Yeah.
then the Black Panther, I think there's DLC in the Avengers
Mhm.
game. One of the Avengers games has like a Black Panther DLC, but it's not a standalone game at all.
And it's not narratively substantial either. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
It's very slender, yeah.
Cool. So yeah, but I mean, like, this is the thing we're talking about because that's an unmitigated success.
Yep.
Any other, well, of course, we have games out. Of course, everything is ready to go at that time, and they are still in development on the Black Panther game after
Wow.
what, 6 years, 7 years?
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a studio that's picked it up. So, to be seen. But
Yeah.
our stories do not get translated into this medium very often. Tanya the Pass did a TTRPG based on, I believe, N.K. Jemison's work. That's right, N.K. Jemison's books. But in general, a lot of really amazing work from really talented Black creators never makes it to the game space, in part because of familiarity. And, we hit up against a lot of that when we were creating the game. But it was really important to us to represent in a lot of ways. One, to represent and to, play a small part in the amazing world that Issa and them created.
Mm-hmm.
And her, their whole team, and like the loving way that they showcase Blackness, the way in which, especially like darker skinned Black people are portrayed, which again, you don't really see often in media. And there were all these things that as we were developing like the scripts for the game and stuff like that, that when we went back to the source material, realizing things like Black women are never harmed in Issa's world. There's never a moment like you see in a lot of other Black pop culture that there's moments where women get drinks thrown on them or somebody smacks them or there's some kind of violence. And, those are really common setups. Those are really common issues, having like cat fights in games between women competing over a man. That is not true at all to Issa's universe. And if you're paying attention, you're like, oh, wait, like it's not, she doesn't say it explicitly. That's not going to happen. But you just start noticing that in her world, unless it's a very specific plot point, Black women generally are not disrespected in any real way. And so the ways in which the usual tropes that you use in a video game to establish tension or conflict had to make sure that we were keeping that within the world. And then there's a whole process when you work with a license versus a creative, like a game that you made up. So there's a whole thing like we had to get likeness from all the characters, from all the different people who played on the show, getting their approval, stuff like that. So it was a really interesting process from start to finish. And then we released, and the other thing that we did was we wanted to build what we call culturally informed game mechanics. And so there aren't tons of games that have received major releases that involve hip hop or hip hop culture, that involve the way that, we talk as Black people, like finding a narrative writer. I ended up being the main narrative writer for the game, along with, other talented folks like Jordan, Toya, all these other folks. But like, it was a real hunt in the beginning, to try to find somebody that could write in a Black American cultural voice. And that was just really difficult to find in the games industry. There are other Black narrative writers, but fairly few. And a lot of them are Canadian. It's not necessarily the same cultural background. And so finding the right fit for the voice, finding the right fit that was going to make it through like HBO's requirements, there was a lot that was happening with this game that hadn't been done. But the other piece that we did was we invented a system called Rhyme Step, because there wasn't a rap rhyme composition mechanic. And that's really important in Insecure, because Insecure was, oh, hold on one second, please. Hey, I'm recording an interview. Thank you. Sorry about that. All right, where was I?
You were talking about the mechanics, the rhyme system,
Yes.
and rap.
Okay, so the cultural mechanic that we created was called Rhyme Step, and it was a way to have a rap rhyme composition mechanic that didn't exist on the market just yet. There were other rap games, but they're normally in a genre called rhythm action, where you're like tapping the buttons in time. They're not specifically about composition. And so we had wanted to create something that reflected something that Issa did in the show, which is she would always rap in the mirror about her emotions, about what was going on. It would happen to Aqua Black Girl. In the show, they call it Mirror Bitch. So she's rapping through a mirror, but the mirror is a reflection of her inner self in a lot of ways. And we wanted something so that so in the game, whenever you encounter a mirror in the game, you're expected to do bars, right? There's a rap that pops up that you come and do. So like a little mic appears and you start. And so, but there was nothing like that on the market. And so, Mitu and Ethan Red, who was our founding art designer and also a game designer in his own right, and Anongo, who is a rapper who raps as Samus, Nongo Lumumba Kasango is her full name. She's an academic. She teaches currently at Brown as a professor of acting practice. But she is also a rapper in her own right. She goes by Samus, like Metroid, as you know. Dropped a bunch of amazing albums like Pieces in Space, which I feel like is a masterpiece. Has just done so many amazing things for the culture, has her own kind of following. And as a result, was able to take that rapper's brain and try to figure out how does it become a game mechanic? How do we translate, what Anongo terms kind of higher order rap skills into zeros and ones so that it can be playable and can be a system. So we spent a significant amount of time doing that as well. So when the game came out, it was kind of a first of its kind in a lot of ways, first of its kind in terms of a license from HBO, first of its kind in terms of not the very first, because there were some other games that came before it, like VH1 had a briefly lived Love and Hip Hop game, but kind of a first of its kind based on Black franchising, and then on top of that, a first of its kind for the mechanic. So we were trying to break a lot of ground in this game.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it because I think the mechanics side is an area when we talk. So what I love about how the archive forces me, like as a game scholar to think about games is that when we talk about representation in games, for so long, the focus has been on characters, kind of understandably so, right? That like, oh, where are Black characters in games? Can I represent myself in a game? And to me, that's always one important part of the question. But I think even when it comes to mechanics, there's a representational aspect to mechanics, right? Like, what are you representing when you have a mechanic? When you are cooking something, you're representing cooking. When you're rhyming or rapping, you're representing or simulating, that activity. So I think when it comes to mechanics, there is a lot of space here to not only invent different mechanics within the games, but to really understand what that means in a cultural sense, right? What that means in a Black cultural sense in this case, and that's so fresh, right? It also relates to sound design and audio design. So you have the mechanics and they're rhythm based, but as you said, in the game, it's also about composition. It's composing. You as the player have a choice. You're choosing the words that you want to complete your rhymes in game. And so it is more you're a lyricist at that point.
It's also interesting because it feels like even for us, right, as kind of the folks who can conceptualize this version of the Black Games Archive, right? It's been like a real knowledge making process, because when we first started to think about like the taxonomy and what these things look like and whether or not like we had a whole day where we talked about just Black mechanics, right? And whether Black mechanics existed. And we were like going through and watching like talks that other people had, like designers and developers had given about Black mechanics and mechanics in games, and just like kind of trying to figure out what Black mechanics were and whether or not they existed. But like just as we've kind of continued to like talk and learn and archive things, right? To be able to figure out for ourselves, like what Black mechanics look like, right? Because I think that, at least for me, like my initial thoughts on Black mechanics have changed fairly substantially when we start going back and looking at like games over the last, oh my gosh, games over the last 50 plus years, right? And starting to look at how games are shifting and changing today when technological possibilities are different than they were in the 70s and 80s, right? So yeah, it's and that's one of the, I think, again, one of the really important reasons that the Black Games Archive has to exist, or any games archive has to exist, right? Because being able to look at the progression of games and game mechanics, right, over the course of 50, 60, 70 years, right, as time goes on, we'll be able to see how things have changed and have a better understanding of how these things operate, not only mechanically, but culturally.
Yeah, and also too, like these things are always in conversation with each other, and they're always informing each other. So like, again, how do you even define a mechanic, right? So like even something as simple as if you look at like a deck of cards, which is one of my new favorite things to deep dive. How many different games can one deck of
Here we go,
cards,
baby.
right? I mean, yeah, so the black rules of Uno are just like the black rules of Monopoly. I did not know money under free parking was not a thing. And so Monopoly over here tweeting, I was like, what are you talking about? Of course you put the money in free parking. That's what that's supposed to be. Writing big on the Joker for space. Right? Every space thing I've ever seen, somebody hand wrote big Joker, little Joker. Okay, this is what that's for.
Or
and don't start talking about bid whiz.
I want deuces high. If we got big Joker, little Joker, we also play with deuces or above that too. So you can have a whole nother tier of spades, right? So we would do deuces wild. That's what we do.
Yeah, so there's so many different ways to modify, right? These basic mechanics. I mean, like blackness in general. There's so many ways to modify something that wasn't made for us into something that we want it to be. And then on top of that, then when you add in like the technological layer, so like I always talk about Jacqueline Beauchamp and her game from the Black College Football Experience when she was running Energized. And, in addition to her being one of the few other Black women I can look at and be like, yo, you ran a studio, like this was you. That innovation was mind blowing. And again, it was like she was taking two things that already existed on the market, right? So she had a college football game and she's following the conventions of a college football game. And then at halftime, you go plug in the drum pack from Rock Band and play the drum line. That is amazing to me, right? Like that's Black cultural innovation. I was like, I play sports games. And I was like, I lie. I don't play sports games unless they're very Black, like NBA Jam, in which case, yeah, I will play that sports game, right? So, but again, it's like, what is the cultural feel of that piece? So I think there's a lot to explore with Black cultural mechanics. I think on our side, one of the things that's interesting, Nango and I actually wrote an academic chapter about this. And I say I wrote a piece and then Anango did the academic part, but it's Anango and I wrote a chapter that was in a book that died in the pandemic. I don't know what happened; it's not published, but we wrote a whole chapter about the choices that we were making when building the system, because there were a lot of considerations. So, for example, Issa uses the N-word really frequently in the show. And a big part of that is because she has total editorial control, because it's a linear piece, right? This is a show. It is Issa's eye, it's the directorial eye, it's the writer's eye, and everybody's coming from a Black cultural background. And these are the actors that are also coming from a Black cultural background. Very safe to be playing with words that belong to us, versus when you have a game that is for mainstream audiences and you don't know how that's going to be seen, received, used. And so we made the decision to omit it from the game. It's not omitted from Issa's universe, but in our game, because of the agency that we give to the players, we were thinking about the ways in which these things can be unintentionally weaponized. In the same light, we looked a lot at like the ways in which you can use language in the game. So for example, I think one of my favorite things that Anango tends to use in her talks, I use in all my talks too, is talking about like, even the word bitch, right? And it's like, we looked at trap feminist work, hip hop feminist work. How do we look at a word like bitch? Is it something that we're including? Is it something that's going to go? It's in all Issa's rhymes. What do we
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
And
I
so
see
our
here,
ultimate,
even I'm sorry to interrupt on the ad here. Mirror, bitch, to hype yourself, but bitch, we got the star there for the eye to
that's
hype
also
yourself
that's
up
apps
in
for
the rhymes.
requirements, yes.
Yeah.
There's a star
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
also like the official, like if you look at the code, the official term for it is mirror beats. It's not mirror bitch.
Okay.
Even though Issa
Okay.
calls it,
Okay.
hey, mirror bitch, like that is established, but that gets
Yep.
into
Yep.
sticky territory in the code size. We had to like change it a little bit. But one of the things that was interesting about it was we were like, okay, so how do we look at these words? And so Anango was pulling on the work of Cecily Bowen and
Mm.
went, we don't allow these words to be weaponized in a way that's derogatory to other players and to women. But you can use these words in the affirmative. So you can't be like, you're a bitch, but you can say, I am that bitch.
Mm-hmm.
That is a distinction that we make within our system that allows people to still express themselves, but to not use those words and weaponize those words in certain ways. And so there were millions of conversations like this about all kinds of things around how we're going to construct a system that is designed to affirm and uplift our players, and feel true to the culture without kind of inheriting a lot of the homophobia and misogyny that also tends to characterize rap and rap lyrics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to make sure that we think through, because, one of the exciting things for me is when I see that a game hits on a lot of this. It really, I think it gives you a deeper, kind of richer space to engage that work. And I'm already seeing, like, right off the bat that this game has a lot. This game hits on a lot of what we're thinking about for the taxonomy. So, like, in terms of development, what's the labor force like? You got it, right? Voice acting and motion capture, I'm not sure. I don't remember if we have. I think we have. We do have like sounds and we have text, but I don't remember if there's a voice acting component to it.
Yeah, so
Um,
initially there was. That's an interesting
mhm,
question because again, are we enabling racial ventriloquy
mhm,
if you have
mhm,
a Black woman's voice over it? Because initially Samus was rapping on the line. So I'll try to send you the first ever prototype. Which we didn't,
mhm,
so we went a different direction. But the first ever prototype was like long phrases, not just bars. So like the final version is individual words that you use.
mhm.
The first version was phrases, which is really hard to match contextually, but that's a whole conversation. But
Yeah.
Samus is voicing the rhymes in the first one, and they're really, really fun. I really love that version. But
Okay.
we also just
Yeah.
wondered about again, what is the vision of this if there's like 6 white boys playing and how does that
Yeah.
and so we went toward a kind of compromise
Mhm,
that, we were lightly calling raplish, right? Similar to Simlish,
mhm. That's
where you
exactly
got,
the way I thought about it
yeah,
yeah.
I was like, it's like Simlish until
it
you get to
sounds like
that last
Simlish.
word and then it gets articulated. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Exactly. And so it's Samus in her studio being like ba 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 fresh. Like that's Samus
Mhm,
doing that. So
mhm,
yeah, there's some
mhm,
voice acting in it. We didn't use
mhm,
mocap in part because Ethan wanted kind of like an anime soft sell
mhm. Yeah.
look to the game. And so that was the style we went for. We didn't go for photorealistic, which is when you would normally use a mocap. Um,
Mhm.
those things are getting a lot cheaper. So, more people have access to it now, but we went with a highly stylized version.
Right, right.
Different.
Yeah.
That's what happened with voice acting.
And then I think we pretty much have everything else. We have mechanics, which we've already talked about, narrative themes, the politics, ideology, like the history, the historical and political lens of the project itself. It's that's on point. The Black playable characters, yes, you can do a lot in the character customization system, which is also on there. And Black NPCs, you got the crew from Insecure, right? So absolutely. Intersectionality, it's rich in that sense representationally. Black cultural traditions, hip hop, we've just mentioned like rap, hip hop, rhyming, but also the intertextual relationship to Black TV show, Black Insecure, Black televisual history. So there's depth there. The character creation system is pretty robust. You know, the different body sizes, hair, different clothing, all kinds of things I think that you can mix and match and play around with there to get enough of a sense of being able to design yourself or design someone else who's not you. We always think it's like representing ourselves, but representing whoever you want to represent, right? That you have that space to do that. And then the fandom and community reception, I remember being so hyped. And it's true that this was like the pandemic times because everything felt so large at that point. Like every anticipation, everything that you're learning about in that portal of time. And I remember just everybody waiting and wanting this game, and there being such avid, community for it. And I hope that it stayed true too, going forward, because as you mentioned, kind of at the start of our conversation, it's so hard to get funding for projects, designed by and for a primarily Black audience.
Yeah, that's not really a thing in the games industry, to let you know. I mean, like, I gave a talk at GDC this year where I talked about like my favorite publisher rejection, because you get a lot of rejections, and a lot of the rejections were literally like, you're talking to so tech funding in general, only a very small percentage ever goes to Black founders, and even smaller percentage to Black women. I think Project Diane put the percentage at 0.067, and that was before the current like drop in the market. So like the amount of like the trillions of dollars that get spent, only a very tiny trickle ever comes to like Black-led companies or Black women-led companies. And so you're already seeing that. And then games is a smaller subset and a riskier subset of that tech venture capital area. And so generally the folks who invest in games are people who had hit games or who were in the industry, and there aren't many folks who look like us or understand what we're doing. And so you're generally having these conversations with people where they were asking us questions like, who is Issa Rae? Like they had never heard of her. And at this point, Issa Rae was the voice of the NBA. She was voicing the Final Four. She was like the person doing it. And we were like, she was like on every magazine cover. We were like, have you been outside? Like this is Issa. But like there's just no cultural understanding of what this is and why it was significant. And then the other piece of it, so we had, like I said, my favorite publisher rejection was one where they were so affirming because they were like, hey, like we understand this is a dope, super dope IP. It's definitely moving the culture. You guys seem like the studio to do it. This is definitely an underserved market in games. Like, but we literally have never tried to talk to this audience. We can't help you, which is what a publisher is supposed to do. They're supposed to help your distribution, all other things. And so we ended up doing a lot of stuff ourselves and a lot of things by hand, even like you mentioned, the character creator. And that was such a struggle because again, like we have plus size characters insecure on plus size, like there's a whole bunch of ways in which we look, but the plus size body models that you get like off the shelf, everybody was like a can, like a garbage can. You just kind of look like there's no like nuance to it. And so a lot of the stuff that we had in the game that were like hairstyles, this is before like AM Dark made the 3D Afro hair library that people can borrow from. Everything had to get made by hand, which makes everything much more expensive. So if you're trying to represent things that don't exist and you're building that from scratch, right? Again, we're working with less funding to begin with, and things are costing 2 or 3x what it should be. So even to give you a sense, a plus size body model is not rigged the same way a straight size body model is, right? And so we had 2 default body models, like a straight size and a plus size. And the rigging for each is different. So that means every time you're paying somebody to come and rig your game, you're paying them twice because they have to do the rigging for one and then the other. And so again, it's all of these little things that really start to add up on your games project. And when you're trying to represent people fairly, when you're trying to represent a diversity of tones and ranges, it really starts to get very complex because a lot of that stuff is not going to be in like the Unity asset store. It's not going to be in a useful way. Even like who just did their avatars over again? It's either Ready Player Me or InWorld. I forget which one, but they're like this. They've got goo gobs of funding. Oh my God! Like all the AI money has gone to them. They have some ridiculous amount of funding.
Right.
And they just introduced a plus size body model. And again, so you can have like pear hips, you can have like a big blocky top, And that's a place that has tons of funding. So again, like the nuances we're working with, especially trying to represent Black body types and the types of things that, you know, we're not necessarily built the same way in different ways. And how does that still look appealing and interesting in a 3D game model? All of those things were stuff that we had to work out in order to, you know, ultimately ship this game.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think it's important for people to hear the technical realities, right, of that, the financial and the technical realities that limit this kind of production when people or players are frustrated, you know, with the lack of options out there. There are a multitude of reasons why.
Yeah, I mean, like the conversations I used to have with Ethan about like, can men have beards? Beards in a 3D game is like, it just becomes this whole, it's like, well, the planes are moving, is the beard gonna go through the wall, like whatever. Compromise, everybody's got goatees. Everybody got goatees. So sorry, I can't deal with this anymore. We'll try to patch it later. Like, but it's one of like, we wanted our Black male players to be able to feel fresh and to get haircuts and get cool styles and whatever. But the realities of coding and rigging and figuring out like, okay, how's this beard moving through the world? Like, is this beard going through Issa's face? Like, it was too much to do. So the best we could do was a goatee. But it's one of those things where it's like you make all these trade-offs when you're making a game, and a big part of the trade-offs is how well supported are these types. Like if you want a treasure box for a treasure box game, you can get that in AI. That's almost free at this point. There's 8,000 treasure boxes in the App Store. There's so many things that you can use or utilize to make your game. But when you're trying to make Black specific games with Black specific assets, a lot of that stuff is not on the market. You have to do it yourself.
Yep. So, you know, kind of, and I'm mindful of our time here. I think this is a wonderful introduction to the game. This video will go up on the site, and it will be a part of the featured, the featured game card for the game, and it'll be there. And I think, and for the physical archive, because again, our intention is to have multiple repositories and multiple ways of archiving Black participation in the medium. So for the physical archive, we're going to need that picture, that photo of you guys in front of the "What a Time to Be Alive" sign.
So on my Instagram, I'll send it to you.
That and you know, early drafts and models, right? This is all about the process, and this all goes into making the game. And we need to document that too, because there will be game historians and cultural historians and, you know, African Americanists and Americanists, etc., who will find this useful, you know, for their research, for their future designs, all of that. This will be a part of a rich repository. So in the final moments, we wonder if you have any words of advice. You know, I think a lot of things are cyclical in the industry, you know, and so this is a moment where there's a downturn in terms of there's layoffs and cuts, right, in terms of the labor force, which disproportionately impact those small numbers, those already small numbers of Black devs and women in the industry and non-binary folk, right? They're disproportionately impacted by this. But I guess I wonder if you have any words of wisdom with both of us, all of us working in an educational context too, you know, for that student out there who finally made it through and is trying to make their game, and they're trying to figure out a life cycle for it. I always say I want to make an Octavia Butler game. My students are prototyping different versions of what that game could be. Octavia Butler should have several games and several interactive experiences. So
as far as I'm concerned, but we could discuss that later.
Let's team up. Let's get it. But for that student that is, you know, wants to do this work and is passionate about this work and also intimidated by the reality of trying to get their brilliance, their creative brilliance out there ever, what do you have to say to those people?
Oof. Wow.
In 2 minutes or less. No.
2 minutes, I know. 2 minutes. Let's start with the broad part, okay? I think every game project needs to start with love, right? You need to love this thing. This is going to be 2 to 3 years of your life, sometimes 5, sometimes 8. You need to love this, but also understand love is not enough, okay? And so many folks that I know, not even just in the Black community, like game development in general is extremely difficult. And there are so many different ways your game will fail. in so many different ways. The only way for you to actually have a successful game is to get in there and mix it up. You got to keep trying stuff. You got to try things. You got to fail at things. You got to understand that you're going to have setbacks. And I mean, that's every creative career, though. That's every single place, right? I was at Sundance and I was watching this amazing Journey to Mars, the Nikki Giovanni documentary. And I was just thinking about how beautiful it was and how well put together it was. And the filmmakers had won an award. So they came from the award show and then they came to our Q&A and they were crying because they were like, you don't understand what we went through. Like the art director left, we had to start all the art over. It took 4 extra years and we thought it was going to actually take. Then Nikki got sick. We didn't know we were going to finish it. Like they were so stressed out talking about like everything it took to bring this masterpiece to screen. And I mean, all of us sitting there enjoying it had no idea. So just know that the creative journey is long and it is difficult and it's going to require a lot of you. But again, center it in love. Why are you doing this? Why did you want to make this game? And then be flexible about how it comes together, because your first game is not going to be your best game. That is going to be in front of you. So you're just going to keep tweaking and refining and tweaking and refining. And game development in particular is a uniquely brutal kind of space where it's like, it's very hard to imagine that like Steven Spielberg is trying to do a film and somebody's like, nah, Steven, I mean, your last movie was like 5 years ago. We don't know you, bro. Like that, but that is how game development is. And so a lot of this is heart and believing in the story that you want to tell and the reason why you want to tell it in an interactive format. And then the other piece of it is understanding that you need to be super flexible with the way in which things come together. Your original vision will probably not be the thing that makes it to distribution, just because in the time that you're making the game, technology will change. The way in which the industry works will change. The only constant in games is quote activity, but like the only constant is change. Change. That is the only thing you can count on. It's going to be change. And so being flexible around how something gets done is really important. And the other piece too is we all have grand ambitions. We all really, really want to do the biggest thing, the broadest thing, the most amazing thing. And the thing I've learned, because so Insecure was the first game we shipped, and then we shipped Hell Iambic, that was the second game. And then I made a third game that was about the Fourth Amendment that actually kind of failed. I have to like rebuild it now. But like, the thing that you learn from shipping games is that it is much better to have something small, tight, and well executed that you can keep building on than to have some grandiose vision that is chunking along because it's overscoped. And so thinking about, again, centering it in love. What is the thing I love? And then what is the smallest way that I can bring it to my players? Because without players, you don't have a game.
That's wonderful advice. Rich, right? That's also archived. How do we continue to mentor, help uplift people, but also help give them a way forward, a practical tips to tackle what seems like such an insurmountable thing at times. So appreciate it. Appreciate you always. And we also want to thank you for being on the advisory board for the Black Games Archive. And, as this project continues to grow and shape and rely on the feedback of the community, we can only imagine where it's going to go. And we've got some really exciting ideas for other phases of this and other versions of this. So thank you for your time and your contributions and your
knowledge and your eloquence. You were talking and I had to jot some things down. I was like, I have to jot this down. This is going to come back. We're going to need this at some point. I'm going to write all this down right now because I'm going to forget.
Well, I mean, y'all know how to find me, so just call. Yeah. I'm around. Luckily, none of us are dead yet. I was like, finally get around writing that book on the Black history of video games. Be calling up. Let's talk about this because luckily, most of us aren't dead. We're still here.